Well, good morning, and I'll say hello from here at the Catacombs of Sixtus, I think it is. We drove out the Appian Way a while out of the city of Rome, and after going to the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. I guess we'll talk more about that later. But anyway, here we are about to go in and go visit the catacombs this morning and following the Appian Way. And I haven't looked this up, but I'm pretty sure when we get to Acts chapter 28 and follow, that's Paul's coming in and the group and the entourage that followed him along this route. And there's a lot more we could say about the catacombs, and I'll maybe say more about that when we come out later. But I want to reflect a little bit on yesterday when we went to St. John's Lateran in the city. That's one of the high churches of Roman Catholicism, and we went to see the steps, the holy steps. And that plays such a huge role in the story of Martin Luther and his change of attitude towards Rome. He came and made a visit on behalf of his monastery and came to those steps and did the steps on his knees and doing the prayers, all those things to gain indulgences. I remember him mentioning one regret that his parents hadn't died yet, so he couldn't do it to make sure they got to heaven right away. But when he finished going up those steps, it was one of those eye-opening moments for him as he finished and he stood up and he thought, did that do anything? Was it anything of value? And all the value the church had placed on that, and beginning to question. And when he returned home, it was a few years before you get to the 95 Theses, but that marked a moment in his life of questioning and wondering about what the church was about. I had a question as we there, because I started thinking about our devotions on Acts as we had Paul on the steps being led into the fortress Antonia, and he stopped on those steps into the barracks, and from there he gave his sermon, his message that was for the Jewish population in the Temple Square. And of course these steps are remembered for them being the place where Jesus was taken up by the Jewish leadership up to the Roman leaders, to Pilate. But those years later, when Paul was in the city and had that part of his his visit, his participation, he was coming to the temple to do that. He was arrested there and had that opportunity to preach and to give his message, to talk about who he was and what he was about. So we saw those steps, and we saw, even as we were there, people on the steps doing that same thing Luther did 500 years ago.
Mentioned they're covered with wood now.
They are covered with wood. I guess how worn out have they been? Well, they're 2,000-year-old steps, so they maybe had a little bit covering, protected. But we went from there to the Vatican, and we entered we entered St. Peter's Square, apparently just after the Pope had given an address in the morning, and it was overwhelming crowds in there. It was hard to move, and I took some pictures later of as the crowds began to disperse. There were much fewer there after our lunch hour, but we had a time in the square we were not able to go into St. Peter's Basilica, in part because of the wait, the line, several hours of line to try and get through security and get in there. We did go to the Vatican Museum, and there we were able to visit a lot of different things. We went and walked through the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel was as full as could be. We were told 15 minutes. Well, most of the time you had to work just getting through the crowd and not a lot of time to sit and contemplate. And it was supposed to be a place of silence and no pictures, but boy, there was a mild roar, the noise, I guess just that many people and different conversations, and my goodness, the number of people were snapping pictures. I kept hearing them say, no pictures, even as you were watching them all the time. So a little distraction from trying to look, bend your head back and look up at the ceiling and take in all the wonders. And it was only after I got out that I realized I hadn't even tried to look at the one side with the picture of the revelation and the images they talked to us about before we went in there. So I'm going to have to look that up again later.
I did.
You looked at, my wife looked at them, but not me. So anyway, as we came out of the Vatican Museum, then we made our way back, but ending the day, I will say, well, our group is going into the catacombs, so I guess I'm going to have to say goodbye now, but we'll post this later today and just a little bit about our trip and what we're doing. So we'll talk.